Something is happening right now with Pi Network that has the community buzzing. And I need to talk about it, because if what I'm seeing is accurate, we might be watching the final major phase before something significant changes with this project. For years, Pi has been slowly migrating users from their test environment to the main net. Batch by batch, wave by wave. Testing the system. Making sure everything works. And we've all been watching and waiting for what comes next. But what's happening now feels different. The patterns I'm observing, the signals from within the community, and the technical changes being discussed all point to something that could be the last major step in this long process. Hello again, Pi Network pioneers, and welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Nathan. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with other pioneers so they don't miss what's coming next. And let's make the comments explode. Type Pi to the moon and drop your country so we can see where our global pioneer family is tuning in from. Back to the video. Some people in the Pi community are calling this phase Project Genesis. And whether that's an official term or just community speculation, the name captures something important. Because if this migration wave is what it appears to be, it's not just moving more users, it's potentially finalizing the foundation of the entire network. So what makes this migration different from all the others? Who's being moved in this wave, and why does that matter? And what technical changes might be happening behind the scenes that would signal we're approaching a major milestone? Let me walk you through what I've pieced together, and you can decide for yourself if we're really at the end game. To understand why this current phase might be significant, we need to look at how Pi has approached migration up until now. For the past year or more, Pi Network has been moving users from their enclosed testnet to the mainnet in waves, not all at once, gradually. And each wave has been bigger than the last. Hundreds of thousands of users, then millions. The stated reason for this slow approach was stress testing. They wanted to make sure the blockchain could handle the volume, that transactions would process smoothly, that the system wouldn't crash under the weight of millions of users all trying to use it at the same time. And that makes perfect sense from an engineering perspective. You don't launch a new blockchain with tens of millions of users all at once. You'd be asking for disaster. Better to move slowly, identify problems, fix them, and then move forward. So previous waves were about capacity testing, about proving the infrastructure could handle the load. They were moving large numbers of people to see if the network could process all those transactions without breaking. But here's what I've noticed. The current migration wave appears to be smaller in terms of raw numbers. It's not about moving 5 million people at once. It's more selective, more targeted, and that's what makes it interesting. Because if you're still testing capacity, you'd want to move as many people as possible to stress the system to its limits. But if you're done with capacity testing and you're moving into a different phase, you might choose to move a specific group of people for a specific reason. And that reason would be about stability, not volume. About establishing baseline economic activity, not just proving the blockchain can handle traffic. This is where the theory of Project Genesis comes in. The idea that this wave isn't about testing anymore. It's about activation. About turning on the actual economy, about transitioning from a test environment to a real, functioning financial network. But if that's what's happening, who would you choose to move first? Who would be the ideal users to establish that baseline? That's the question that reveals everything about what might be coming next. So let's think about this strategically. If you were designing the final migration wave, the one that establishes the foundation of your new economy, who would you choose? You wouldn't necessarily choose the people with the most Pi. Having a lot of coins doesn't mean you know how to use them productively. You wouldn't choose randomly either, because you'd want people who understand what they're doing. You'd choose based on contribution, based on who has proven they're committed to making the network succeed, based on who has the technical knowledge and the behavioral patterns that indicate they'll actually use Pi as intended. And this is where the community speculation gets interesting. People are theorizing that this wave prioritizes 3 specific groups: First, the node operators. These are pioneers who have been running nodes on their computers. They've dedicated their own electricity, their own hardware, their own time to helping secure and process transactions on the network. They've proven commitment through action, not just holding coins. If you're going to establish a stable network, you want the people who are already helping run the infrastructure to be among the first fully active users. That creates immediate stability. Second, the ecosystem builders. These are people who have been actively testing the Pi browser, using Test Pi to interact with decentralized apps, participating in hackathons, and basically treating Pi like a real utility rather than just a coin to hold. These users understand that Pi is meant to be used. They're not waiting to dump it on an exchange. They're interested in the actual ecosystem being built. If you want to establish real economic activity, these are exactly the people you'd move first. And third, what some are calling trust anchors. These are pioneers who built strong security circles with fully KYC verified members. People who understand the trust-based foundation that Pi is built on. People who vouched for real humans and built genuine networks. These three groups represent commitment, utility understanding, and network integrity. If you were establishing the foundation of a new economy, you'd want exactly these types of users to be your first wave of full participants. Now, I can't confirm that this is exactly who's being migrated right now. Pi Network hasn't released those specific details. But the pattern makes logical sense. And if this theory is correct, it tells us something important about what phase we're actually in. But there's another element to this that's potentially even more significant. And it has to do with what's happening on the technical side of the blockchain itself. Because moving users is one thing, but permanently changing how the network operates is something else entirely. Here's where things get technical, but stay with me because this is crucial. Up until now, Pi's mainnet has been what they call enclosed. It's live, it's functional, but it's still operating under certain controls. The core team has maintained the ability to make changes, to intervene if something goes wrong, to adjust parameters if needed. This makes sense during a testing and migration phase. You want to have safeguards, you want to be able to fix problems quickly if they emerge. But if Pi is going to become a truly decentralized currency, at some point those controls have to be released. The core team has to step back and let the network operate independently. That's what decentralization actually means. And there are signals that this technical transition might be happening now, or very soon. Some community members are talking about a final protocol update, a lock-in of the core code, a moment where the blockchain moves from being adjustable to being fixed, where the fundamental rules become permanent. This would be a massive step, because once you lock the protocol, you can't easily change it anymore. The network becomes truly permissionless. No single group, not even the founders, can control it anymore. Now, why would this happen now? Why during this particular migration wave? Because if you're going to establish the foundation of your economy with your most trusted users, you want to do it on the permanent version of the network. You don't want them building on something that might still change. You want them building on the final, locked version that will never be altered. There's also discussion in the community about finalizing the actual circulating supply of Pi. Right now, there are coins associated with accounts that never completed KYC, accounts that were duplicates or fakes, accounts that are essentially dead weight. If those coins were permanently removed from the total supply, marked as unclaimable, it would do two things. It would finalize the actual number of Pi that will ever circulate, and it would make the remaining Pi mathematically scarcer. That kind of supply finalization typically happens once at a specific milestone. You wouldn't do it during routine operations. You do it when you're ready to transition from testing to full operation. Again, I can't confirm these technical changes are happening right now, but the timing would make sense. Move your foundation users, lock your protocol, finalize your supply, and then you have everything in place for the next phase, And that next phase would be the one everyone's been waiting for. But before we get there, there's one more question we need to address. How would we actually know when this transition is complete? What would be the signal that tells us everything is locked in and ready? So let's say this theory is correct. Let's say Project Genesis is real and it's happening now. Let's say the protocol is being locked and the foundation is being established. How would we know when it's complete? This is where things get interesting, because the signal might not be what you expect. We're probably not going to get a big dramatic announcement. We're not going to wake up to a press release that says, Open Mainnet is now live. That's not how technical transitions typically work with decentralized projects. The signal will be technical and it will be mandatory. Here's what I'm watching for. At some point, potentially soon, node operators are going to receive a notification about a mandatory software update, a new version of the node software that needs to be installed. Mandatory updates are different from optional ones. Optional updates add features or improve performance. Mandatory updates change fundamental protocol rules. They're required because the new version operates differently than the old version, and everyone needs to be running the same rules for the network to function properly. If we see a mandatory node update get pushed out, that would be a massive signal. It would indicate that the protocol has been changed at a fundamental level, that the network is operating under new, finalized rules. And if that update comes at the same time this migration wave completes, the timing would be very telling. It would suggest coordination. It would suggest that everything is being synchronized for a specific reason. Now, some people in the community are speculating that this mandatory update would be the technical moment when the network transitions from enclosed to open, when the restrictions on trading and transferring get removed, when Pi becomes accessible to the broader public and not just the existing user base. I can't confirm that's what would happen, but the logic makes sense. You'd finalize your protocol, migrate your foundation users, push out the mandatory update to lock everyone into the new rules, and then remove the restrictions that have been keeping the network enclosed. That sequence of events would represent a complete transition from one phase to another, from testing to operation, from enclosed to open, from preparation to activation. And if you're a node operator, you'd be the first to know. You'd see that mandatory update notification before anyone else. You'd be the signal that tells the rest of the community something major just changed. So if this theory holds, we're potentially in the final days or weeks before that signal appears, before that mandatory update gets pushed, before the technical transition becomes irreversible. But what would that actually mean for Pi and for the people holding it? What changes when you go from enclosed to open? Let's think through what an open mainnet would actually mean, assuming we're heading in that direction. First, it would mean unrestricted transferability. Right now, Pi can only be used within the Pi ecosystem. You can spend it with merchants who accept it. You can use it in Pi apps, but you can't freely send it to any wallet address you want. You can't move it to external exchanges. An open mainnet would remove those restrictions. Pi would behave like any other cryptocurrency: transferable, tradable, accessible to anyone who wants to interact with it. That would be a fundamental change in accessibility. It would open Pi up to the broader crypto market, to exchanges, to traders, to people who aren't currently part of the Pi community. Second, it would mean price discovery. Right now, there's no open market for Pi. The community talks about value, about what Pi should be worth, about the global consensus value theory. But there's no actual market price because there's no open market. The moment Pi becomes freely transferable and exchanges start listing it, price discovery begins. The market decides what it's worth based on supply, demand, utility, and speculation. That number could be higher or lower than what the community expects. Markets are unpredictable that way. Third, it would mean the project moves from the preparation phase to the growth phase. Everything up until now has been about building the foundation, building the user base, building the ecosystem, testing the technology. Once the network is open, the focus shifts to adoption. to getting more merchants to accept it, to getting more developers to build on it, to proving that Pi has real utility in the real world. That's a completely different challenge than the technical challenge of building the infrastructure. And fourth, it would mean the Pi community's role changes. Right now, pioneers are builders and testers. You're participating in the creation of something that doesn't fully exist yet. Once it's open, you become users and advocates. You're using a tool that's been built and trying to demonstrate its value to others. That's a psychological shift. Some people will thrive in that environment. Others might lose interest once the mystery is gone and it becomes a normal cryptocurrency competing with thousands of others. Now, all of this assumes the Open Mainnet actually happens. And it assumes it happens soon. There's no guarantee of either. Projects can stay in development longer than expected. Technical challenges can emerge. Plans can change. But if the pattern we're seeing is real, if Project Genesis is what it appears to be, then we might be closer to that transition than many people realize. The pieces would be falling into place right now. So what should you be watching for? What are the specific signs that would confirm this theory? Watch for news about this migration wave completing. Watch for announcements about protocol updates. Watch for that mandatory node software update I mentioned. And watch for any communication from the core team about next steps or timelines. If these things start happening in quick succession, it would suggest coordination. It would suggest a planned sequence of events leading to something specific. And that something would likely be the transition we've been discussing. Here's what we know for certain. Pi Network is currently conducting another migration wave. This is documented and observable. The community is theorizing that this wave is different from previous ones. That it's more selective. That it's about establishing foundation rather than testing capacity. We also know that at some point, Pi has to transition from its current enclosed state to an open state. That transition requires technical changes. It requires protocol finalization. It requires removing restrictions. Whether that transition is happening right now, or whether we're in the final preparation stage before it happens, I can't say with certainty. But the pattern is there. The logic is there. The pieces fit together in a way that suggests we're approaching a major milestone. If you're holding Pi, if you've been mining for years, if you've been part of this community, then you're potentially weeks or months away from finding out if it was all worth the wait. Whether Pi becomes a significant player in crypto, or just another project that didn't live up to its potential. Pay attention, watch for the signals, and remember that no matter what happens, you've been part of something unique. A massive experiment in distributed currency creation. That alone is worth noting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.